Welcome to the E-commerce Podcast with Matt Edmundson, a show that brings you regular interviews, tips, and tools for building your business online.
In today's show, we are going to get into it with Marcus, and I'm giggling because I know what his background is on his Skype video, and it's still making me laugh. And we're going to get into all kinds of stuff with Marcus today about how the art of storytelling, the art of telling stories that convert to online sales is the title. I'm really looking forward to this one because in the pre-call, as you know, when we do these podcasts, we do a pre-call with who's coming on the show, just to get an idea of what we're going to talk about so I can connect with people if I've not done them before. And Marcus's pre-call is one of those that actually stands out. He is such a character, and I'm really, really looking forward to this one. It's going to be great. So Marcus is coming up in just a few minutes' time. But before we chat with Marcus, let me take a quick moment to thank today's show sponsors. Let me give a big shout out to one of our show sponsors, Curious Digital. You know what? I love its flexibility. It's such a great platform. You know how when you start out, you might typically use an online platform because they're cheap, they're easy to use, super accessible. But you know what? They aren't that flexible. And as your business grows, you end up moving to an agency, right? Because that's just what you do. And at some point, you're going to have this nightmare to deal with, and it can be incredibly expensive. And the thing for me that I love about KD is it will grow with you. You can start out on the platform easily, and as your business grows, then KD will adapt with you. Now, I don't know of any other platform that does all of that. So if you're in the market for a new e-commerce platform, make sure you follow the links from mattedmundson.com. Take advantage of the offers that they've got for you, and let me know what you think. A big shout out to another show sponsor, the Lightbulb Agency. These guys basically do those bits of e-commerce that you either don't want to do or don't have the skills or expertise to do, right? It's a great service. Let me tell you, these guys do fulfillment, e-commerce marketing, content creation, customer service, product research. I mean, the list goes on. So if you need help with your own online business, you're looking for ways to grow, and you need some help to get there, do get in touch with them. And again, just follow the links from today's show notes. Head on over to mattedmundson.com, and you can follow the links to the Lightbulb Agency. We'd love to put you in touch with those guys. We do broadcast live on Facebook as we record these podcasts, and it's great that, you know, for those of you who do join us by Facebook, you're more than welcome to comment, to ask your questions as we go along. We love it when people interact with us. You can do that, of course. And if you're listening to the audio version of this, make sure, you know, you do subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. Whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, wherever, just subscribe because we are regularly putting out free content that is going to help you build your online business. And you can listen to us in the car, you know, on a run, wherever you do your podcast listening to. But if you do get a chance, make sure you head on over to our Facebook page. Matt Edmundson CO is the Matt Edmundson Co is the Facebook link, or just head over to mattedmundson.com and we'll link to it there. And like the page and sign up to the notifications. So when we do record these podcasts with our amazing guests, you can come join us. You can get an early access because, you know, we're going to record this several weeks before the podcast goes out, and you can comment and so on and so forth and join in the conversation. So do that. It'd be great to see you there. So without further ado, let me introduce to you today's guest. Now, Marcus is, like I say, is an amazing character. You're going to really, really like this guy. And he is going to help us increase our conversion rates and engage more customers by using the old school methods of storytelling. Now, before I give you too much background on Marcus and all that sort of stuff, let me bring him in. Let me press the right button on my screen here. Marcus, good day. We can all see you. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Matt.
And just so I'm clear, which one are you of the three?
I'm the one on the left.
The one whose lips are actually moving at this time. It's great to have you. Thanks for being here. Now, Marcus, I read in your bio that you've been in business. Oh, smack my microphone. You've been in business. You've been doing selling since 1986. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. I wouldn't say I've been selling all that time. For the first 17 years, I was taking orders, and I wasn't very good. It took 15 years to pay off a jar of Nescafe that I bought in Safeway. But I've eventually learned and earned a lot of scar tissue. I'm going to lean forward a little bit because I can see my double chin now.
You just go ahead and reposition yourself. No problem.
There we go. So it's down to 2 instead of 3 now.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. We get the point. We get the message. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the viewport here that the viewers can see. If you're looking on Facebook, you'll get to see there. And for those of you listening to the audio podcast, the reason why I'm smiling, the reason why I'm laughing so much is the background is from the Muppets. I mean, talk about a throwback. It's the two, are they called the grumpy
Statler
old guys? They're called what, sorry?
Statler and Waldorf.
Okay. I knew them as the grumpy old guys that just sort of sat up in the posh box.
Up in the gods, yeah.
Why did you choose that as a background image, just out of curiosity?
Well, they are the... sorry, my daughter's decided to come in. I'm recording at the moment. They're the muse that I have for my podcast. Okay. So essentially, I have 2 grumpy old grizzled veterans upsetting the audience, and the idea is to leave them feeling uncomfortable and challenged.
And does that work?
Yeah, actually, it really does. I'm pleasantly surprised. I thought that my approach would offend and upset people, and it does. But I have a very loyal following, and they seem to derive a lot of value from it.
Do you think? I mean, you brought it up there, and I'm really curious to know what you think about this. Do you think it's good in modern day to be polarizing, to actually step out and say, yes, I am going to upset a few folks with what I'm doing, and that's okay?
Yes. I think if you try and please everyone, you please no one. And if you don't have a position or an opinion, then you are bland and anodyne and vanilla. Now, lots of people will have vanilla as their second choice, but I don't think you grow fast by being just one of the crowd. If you want to differentiate, then you need to stand apart. And I recognized quite early on that of my total addressable market, maybe 3% are my ideal customer. Yeah. And I only focus on them, not because I don't worry about the rest, but the reality is that I serve my ideal customer really well. And if I allow myself to get distracted by what my non-ideal customer wants, then I start producing products and services that are non-core. And net result of that is that I then stop serving my ideal customer well. And if you want to really grow fast, the evidence is absolutely abundant. If you want to grow fast, focus on a very tightly defined niche. So a lot of the work that I do is in IT. Yeah. And it's no longer good enough to be the MSP for health. You now need to be the managed service provider for walk-in clinics of up to 50 doctors in Southeast London. Yeah. Now, if you do that, and you niche and you very clearly define market, then you can grow. And today's topic is really about story. Yeah. Well, if you build stories that are deeply relevant, timely, that enter into the conversations that your prospects are already having, then you lower resistance and you eliminate barriers to entry. But too often, people who are selling are selfish. They are eye-centered. I equate it to showing photos of their ugly children to strangers. The minute you start talking about you, your company, your products, your services, how long you've been in business, then people switch off, because what I learned early on is no one believes what comes out of a salesperson's or a marketer's mouth.
That's very true. Even the salespeople don't believe it.
And even the salespeople don't. I mean, when you think about how bad salespeople's self-concept is, they don't call themselves salespeople anymore. They call themselves business development managers and consultants.
That's very true. Change the title, but not the person, don't they?
Well, what people forget is nothing happens in our economy until someone sells.
Yeah.
And if you don't sell, you don't have a business. What you have is a hobby. Yeah. And the problem with many organizations is that they're squeamish about selling. Selling is a noble profession. It's really important that we understand that selling is the lifeblood of every business.
Yeah.
And whether you sell online or offline, whether it's physical product, intellectual product, or electrons, it doesn't matter. Your job is to go and find people who need help. If you can help them, then you have a moral obligation to sell to them. So I always teach my clients that you have to answer two questions before you do anything else. Can I help?
Yeah.
And am I the right person to help? I would much rather refer them to a competitor than take on the wrong type of business for me or the wrong type of solution for them.
That's quite fascinating. I mean, that's the opposite to how a lot of people in business would think. They're like, a client's a client. Let's grab the client while we can, right? But you're saying...
Not all pounds and dollars are equal.
Yeah.
If you think about it, if you take on the wrong type of customer, I was touching on it earlier, you start to develop the wrong products, or you build the wrong range of products on your e-commerce website. And as a result, you start attracting people who are non-core. And the net result of that is that you end up diverting your attention from communicating with and spending time with and getting honest feedback from your core customers. And the best people to speak to there are three types of people that every business should speak to and get their story.
Okay. I'm going to write this down.
The first are your raving fans, because they can articulate why they love you.
Yeah.
Okay. And why they buy. The second are the people who hate you and have fired you.
Okay.
But that takes a lot of courage, because that will tell you why they dumped you, why they don't buy from you.
Yep.
And then people who change their behavior, if they start buying or stop buying. There are lots of brands out there that have loyal customers who stop buying.
Yeah.
There's a really good example. A partner of mine specializes in helping companies understand exactly why people buy. And this is a big retail consumer brand in the fashion industry.
Yeah.
And the chief marketing officer, his ego got in the way, and he decided
as
that
it always does.
Yeah, absolutely. Ego is the enemy. And he decided that this brand was going to be an action adventure brand. So what did they do? They started all their advertising and their marketing with photos and video of people base jumping, paragliding, skiing, off black runs, all this kind of stuff. Anyway, long story short, they did the analysis and they discovered that in their biggest market, China and Hong Kong, people saw this brand as being something that you went to go out and be seen in. And when you went out for dinner with your family to somewhere nice, you dress up in this stuff.
Yeah.
When they fixed that, £67 million to their top line revenues in 1 quarter.
Wow. That's a big difference.
Absolutely. And so the basis of story is starting with your customer.
So you said, let me just close this link because I like my neat notes. You said there's 3 types of clients that we should have or talk to. One was our raving fans. The second one was those who hate us. What was the third one?
And the third one is people who've changed their behavior.
Okay.
They've stopped buying. They've started buying. They've started buying in bulk in some particular area. What you're looking for is change.
Yeah.
Because that's an indication that there's a catalyst there, and you need to understand the motive, the cause, and the intent.
Okay.
And very few people really understand that, I mean, how to put this politely? Human beings don't understand other human beings.
Yeah.
Okay. If you just think how messed up your own family is, okay, and now you then take this into the context of talking to a stranger remotely through their screen, okay, if you don't really do your research, if you don't understand what makes them tick, if you are not focused on how they go about doing their business, how they live their lives, what matters to them, chances are you will leave a vast amount of money on the table. There's a fabulous book by Tiffany Bova, Tiffany Bova, Bova, called Sales IQ. And in there, she identifies 10 different ways that companies can really get inside their customer's head.
Oh, okay.
The only company that's done it well is Amazon in all 10 areas.
Yeah.
Now, they are quite good at e-commerce, so they're probably a good place to start.
They've learned a thing or two about e-commerce. They've definitely learned a thing. So this book by Tiffany, Sales IQ, you've obviously read it.
Yeah.
Because that was going to be my next question to you, in terms of, this is all great, but how do I do that? And obviously Tiffany's going to cover that in her book.
Yeah, absolutely. Two other books that I urge everyone to read.
Okay.
The first one is The Context Marketing Revolution by Matthew Sweezey, Sweezey. And he's the chief futurist for Salesforce.
Okay, that'll definitely be worth
really
reading.
Sweet, smart book.
Yeah.
And the other one is Marketing Rebellion by the genius Mark Schaefer. And that's Schaefer.
Okay.
I did an interview with him on my podcast about 2 weeks ago, and it is golden. The problem that I see is that people, when they're marketing and when they're selling and when they're telling stories, make themselves the hero.
Okay, now this is going to be interesting. So, I do want to just ask right here. Normally I ask this at the end of the show, Marcus, but this will be a good place to do it. You mentioned you have a podcast, and obviously you've interviewed the chap that wrote Marketing Rebellion on the podcast. What's your podcast called for those that want to go and listen to it?
It's called the Inquisitor Podcast, because I ask awkward and uncomfortable questions.
Okay.
And the URL is Marcus Cauchi, marcuscauchi.podbean.com. And if you want it on Spotify or Apple, just type in Marcus Cauchi. And I have a second podcast called Scale Ups and Hypergrowth. And there I interview sales leaders from the fastest growing technology companies on the planet. And they are growing at hundreds of thousands of percent. You know, one company, UiPath, has grown 100,000% in revenues in 7 years, and they haven't lost control. And that's the important bit.
Yeah.
Because lots of companies grow very quickly, but then they fall apart because they haven't built the right kind of infrastructure. And whatever type of business that you're building, it's crucially important that you plan ahead and you design the business that you intend to become in 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. Because if you do hit the curve of the hockey stick, what will happen is you'll create a traffic jam behind you. Because as sales gets ahead of operations, of finance, of HR, what tends to happen is you start to get this backlog. And in the same way that a traffic jam goes backwards at 12 miles an hour, what you find is that you start creating these bottlenecks and these disconnects. And this is where an organization falls apart, because what happens at that point is you start finding blame creeps in, ambiguity creeps in. There are gaps between the silos. There isn't a handover.
Yeah.
And I learned something really fascinating from interviewing the chief innovation officer for the city of Helsingborg, a guy called Patrick Lindqvist. And he built his team by bringing in non-experts, but users of the public services. So his brief is to turn Helsingborg into a city of innovation for Europe, by 2022. And I'm delighted he's invited me over to their expo.
Oh, fantastic.
But something he did, which is really amazingly insightful, he has hired managers whose sole responsibility is the management of the gaps between the different departments and processes. They're literally gap managers.
That's intriguing. Now, yeah.
How innovative and clever.
Yeah, very clever. Yeah. Very, very clever.
Now, when you think about the power of having customers turn into the people who design your product, design your service.
Yeah.
I know you recently did an episode on customer-generated stories.
Yeah.
Earlier on, I said no one believes salespeople. They'll believe some of what you show them, nothing of what you tell them, some of what they show them.
Yeah.
They'll believe a bit of what other people tell them, but they will believe everything they tell themselves.
Wow, that's good.
And
so, and you're coming, sort of bringing this back to where we were 5 minutes ago. The premise is we can use storytelling to help customers tell themselves the right story, if that makes sense.
Yes, and because
Okay.
I think storytelling has a real power.
Yeah.
Bear in mind, our ancestors have been sat around campfires telling stories about the great emu in the sky, the spaghetti monster, and everything else. And we've been sat around those campfires, and we are creatures of emotion and story. And where so many people go wrong in their marketing, in their selling, even in their planning, is they think human beings are logical. Economists think people are logical, and they were put on the planet to make Russell Grant look good. Yeah.
Oh, you're going to have to explain who Russell Grant is for the international listeners.
Those of you who are young, depressingly young, Russell Grant is an astrologer. So soothsayers in Roman Greece would slit open the belly of a geese and read the entrails. Okay, by and large, most economists have less validity than someone doing that. Okay, there are a couple out there that are definitely worth paying attention to, but by and large, really don't. They talk a load of codswallop. Now, back to my point. If you can get the customer to generate the story, you are far more likely to get a win. So there is a technology company called Kronos, and Kronos do HR software.
Yep.
They're very good at it. But what's really interesting is when they put content out, the content gets almost no direct engagement. What drives the engagement is a few raving fans driving the conversation, and it's the comments that really drive the engagement. They get something like, if I remember rightly, it's something like a 30% conversion rate when people have been driven to them through the comments from customers.
Okay. I mean,
now
that's
think
insane,
about
but yeah.
Okay. So it's really important to get your customer stories. It's crucial that your customers have a voice. And Mark Schaefer talks about this in his book. It's all about humanizing your marketing. And if you take nothing away from this conversation, take this. You must think as your customer, not about them.
Very good. So think, I'm going to write this down. Think as your customer.
Not about
them.
Because when you think about them, you're intellectualizing, you're making assumptions, there's conjecture, there's guesswork. If you enter their skin, look at the world through their eyes. And one of my favorite mentors is a guy called Mark Goulston. And he wrote a book which all of your listeners and viewers should read as well, called Just Listen.
Okay.
And he's the world's leading expert in training people how to do empathic listening. Okay.
Yep.
Now, listening is a whole body experience. You're not just listening to the words that people say. You're listening to how they are clothed, the tone, the pace, the emphasis, the silences, what's not being said. And it's really important that you take this away as well. all human beings want to be heard, feel, felt, and be understood.
Yeah.
When another human being feels like you understand completely how they feel, they will engage. Now, in order to do that, we as sellers, as marketers, need to be vulnerable. We need to be vulnerable first.
Yeah.
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 And when we are crafting our stories, it's so crucial that we make the customer the hero. Why do you think Amazon has reviews, stars, testimonials, customer recommendations?
Yeah.
Yeah, because they drive the sale. The copy that the marketer or the seller has put up there is of almost no consequence. I mean, when was the last time you bought something that, or pretty much anything, and you didn't look at the ones that had 5 or minimum 4-star reviews? Yeah. And when you were really going to make something, a purchase that was important to you, how many times have you not then gone and look at the reviews?
Oh, you always do. Yeah.
You always do. That's our behavior. Unless we've already decided that we're going to buy it and we bought it before or we've seen it. Yeah. Chances are we will always look at the reviews.
You do, or you do what the other thing that it's the same thing, but I'm getting a new computer, so I look at the reviews, but I also go onto YouTube and I watch people do reviews and all that sort of stuff about it. So it's getting more involved, isn't it?
And again, one of the things that I have a tendency to do if I'm going to review, if I'm going to buy something. So yesterday I sneakily bought myself a shiatsu massager. For a vast amount of money. So I've spent 3 or 4 weeks actually doing that. I normally purchase things straight away, but I'm going to have to live with this. And I knew that I would have to justify this to my wife. So I spent weeks.
Tell me how you did that, by the way, because I've been trying to do this for a while, the old massage chair.
Largely by assuming that I'm definitely in the wrong and I shouldn't have done it. But now that's packaging, I can't return it. The reality is I am normally wrong. So, in fairness to her,
I know how you feel.
But I've been sat on my sofa in the conservatory for 13 weeks now, and I'm starting to ache. So I genuinely needed it. So the reality is that you have to tell stories through your customer's voice. Mm-hmm. You, as the owner of the business, have to tell stories that engage your customer in a way that makes them feel like you're a fly on their wall. You understand their position, their situation, their problems, their challenges, their hopes, their fears, their aspirations. And in order to do this, you need to understand that they are the hero and you are the guide. People buy from us. They come to us because they're looking for leadership, a safe pair of hands. They're looking to solve a problem. More often than not, people buy by moving away from pain more than moving towards pleasure. And my research on this, it's anecdotal, so I don't have a paper to refer to, but my close rate is 12 times higher when I identify a pain they want to move away from than a benefit they want to move towards. Now, fear outsells gain on its own 5-1, and pain outsells gain 12-1. But understand this: people buy stuff, services, products, whatever, because they want a better future. So you can't leave them in pain. And the two, it's like yin and yang. Yeah. You need to make sure there is a balance there. So you identify what the problem is that they're trying to fix, and then you draw them through that process and have them tell their story. Yeah. Because prospects never argue with their own data. They'll argue with yours till you're blue in the face.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what you do is you help them to identify what the future, a better future, looks like. So one of my favorite opening questions is, Matt, let's pretend we've been working together, 12 months.
Yep.
And we're looking back to this conversation today. What needs to have changed materially and in your results, in your mindset, for you to say, thank God the best decision I ever made was working with you, Marcus. And then just sit back and let them tell me what that looks like. Because that now creates a gap between where they want to be, where they aspire to be, to gain, and where they are now. And it's my job then to help them realize and understand and see for themselves why it is that I'm the person best suited to help them do that. And if at any point I spot that they're not right for me or I'm not right for them, then I will tell them and I'll say, Matt, hands up. I don't think I'm the right person for you. Let me tell you why, and here's someone else I'll refer you to.
Yeah. Okay, so that's how does that work? If I'm in a room with you, right, and we have that conversation, and how could that work? Do you think online? How would Amazon do that conversation?
It works with videos. It works with chat, with online chat. You gain more credibility from the questions that you ask than the information that you give. So again, it depends on the type of transaction that you operate in. If you're doing high ticket online transactions, then there needs to be some kind of journey. People aren't just going to turn up onto your website and spend 30 grand. Yeah. If they're buying, I don't know, Mars bars, then they'll be looking for the lowest price, because unless you build value into the conversation will always degenerate into cost.
Okay, so let's just unpick that a little bit. So unless you build value into the conversation will always degenerate to cost. And this is really important, I think, for online business, because this is how you stop the race to the bottom, isn't it? This is how you stop. Oh, I've got to now be cheaper than them. They've got, and you create that sort of downward spiral of pricing. So injecting value into the conversation, if I can echo back, Marcus, what I've heard is it's about asking questions that identify, where your customer's at, identifying where they are and where they want to be, and how you can obviously help during that process. I hope I'm not oversimplifying it, but
no, you're not. But what you need to understand is customers go through a journey, and you need to understand what that journey looks like. So what I've found very helpful for my business is content, the production of valuable content that they want to consume. I picked up a client a couple of months ago who'd been following me for 10 years.
Wow, that's a long old time. Yeah.
Now, they'd never commented. They'd never even liked one of my posts. But it just hit the mark. And they said, it was like you were a fly on the wall. We were having this conversation only yesterday. I had to contact you.
Fantastic.
So, how do you do this? Well, you do this through the provision of value before they ever find your website. Because let's face it, most of your audience, their website is invisible. There can only be one person, one website at number one in the Google search at any one time. Okay, so they can spend an absolute fortune, an obscene amount of money. I mean, Facebook last year, get this, $56 billion, 1.73 trillion impressions that never got a single click.
No way.
$56 billion. Wow. Now, you add that up across Google, you add it across Bing and every other website, every other platform. Most pay-per-click is a waste of money because people are not engaging with their customers and drawing them in organically, making them volunteers instead of hostages. And again, Mark Schaefer and Matthew Sweezy both make this point. Your invasive advertising, your invasive marketing doesn't really resonate. I mean, just look at your own behavior. If you run an e-commerce website and you have ever gone online, how often have you clicked on the ads that are served up to you?
No, very rarely.
Yeah. So what you need to do is you need to build community. You need to build a value base so that your customers and your fans are telling your story. The thing that warms the cockles of my heart is how often people say, you've got to talk to Marcus because, and it's some piece of content or a stream of content that I've produced that has resonated with them. And the net result of that is they then tell your story for you. And people will absolutely believe that stuff when it's said repeatedly. Hitler and Trump have both managed to do this. Lie repeated often enough will eventually become believed.
Yeah.
Well, if your clients and your fans are constantly out there giving testimonials, raving about how brilliant you are, giving examples of how you've been able to help them, then that lowers the barriers, because you cannot convince anyone to buy anything ever. People must convince themselves, and that's our job.
Yep.
That's our job as marketers. That's our job as salespeople, as customer success, as customer service. Every time we touch the customer, we need to bring value to them, even if they are not yet buying.
Yep.
Okay, even if they're only a prospect.
So every stage of this customer journey that you're talking about, customers are on a journey, whether it's online, whether it's offline, they're on a journey, and you have to bring this value at each stage in that journey to them.
Absolutely.
These value conversations.
The moment you stop bringing value to them, you're think of this like an emotional bank account. If you're in credit, you can make the occasional withdrawal. If, on the other hand, you are in deficit, so you're overdrawn, there comes a point where they stop giving you any leeway. So it's crucially important that each time you touch them, whether it's through your marketing, through the experience of engaging with you, through your chatbot or your online live chat, through a telephone conversation, it doesn't make any difference. That has to be a valuable experience. And they need to feel like you care about them and you have their interests front and center. So the model I would urge you all to pay attention to is Jeeves from Jeeves and Wooster. Yeah. He doesn't always agree. Sometimes he challenges, but he does so respectfully. And he never, whilst he may let Bertie Wooster fail, he never lets him fail so badly that it's terminal. And I believe that you asked me the question right at the top of the conversation. Sorry, let me close this door.
No problem.
You asked me the question right at the top of the conversation about whether it's a good idea to be controversial. I think you should be. I think you should polarize. You should have an opinion, take a position, because not everyone is qualified to become your customer. And certainly not everyone is qualified to have a demonstration, a presentation, a proposal. Part of the problem that I see with a lot of e-commerce is that, particularly for software, for example, there's a lot of this try before you buy. Without any agreement as to what happens next, about what the customer is going to measure, how they are going to go about making their decision. And if you haven't done that, then you spend 80 to 90% of your time chasing. When you think about what it costs an e-commerce business to bring in a lead. And in some of the categories, we're talking tens or hundreds of pounds per lead. And then they blow those leads because they haven't got they've not mapped out and they've not thought about who their customer is, why they are coming to them, from where they are coming, where they are in their life cycle. And as a result of that, they miss the mark. And that company that I was telling you about, where they misjudged the brand. Well, the same consultancy that does the work with them worked with another company, and by changing 7 words, they managed to increase sales by over £50 million. 7 words was all it took, because they actually understood the customer. And so the key is to get inside the skin, inside the mind of your customer. Understand what it's like to be them.
So if I go back to your example, Marcus, of where you were talking about the software company that does the free trial and how that doesn't really work because you're not getting the customer to quantify what's going to happen afterwards. How would you go about doing something like that?
Okay, so tell you a story. I have a client who was getting 600 downloads a month and they closed 0.5%.
Wow.
Now, how much time do you reckon that took up of their sales team?
Most of it, I would imagine.
Pretty much. Okay. Last month, they posted their best results ever. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, what you do is, first of all, when people make an inquiry, you need to qualify who they are. Now, people who typically want to download software typically don't have chief in their title, do they?
That's very true.
Okay. So they're normally engineers. Now, if an engineer is going to fiddle, they're normally doing it because they're interested and they want to tinker and maybe improve their CV. Yeah. But they have no power. They have no authority. They can perhaps recommend, and they may have some influence. So, first of all, in many cases, not all. So there's one great example, which is Crystal, which is a widget that fits on LinkedIn. And it allows you to analyze the personality of everyone's profile.
Oh, yeah, I know the one you mean. Yeah.
Brilliant. And that's all been a try before you buy model. And that's worked really well for them. But they have a fabulous philosophy, which is slow down to speed up. What they wanted to do was build that user base and create a community of raving fans. Another fantastic one is Kahoot. Kahoot is a software company. It's sub $2 million based out of Oslo. Get this, 1 billion unique users. 70 million unique users per day.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they did that all through word of mouth, through the power of story. Kids talking to other kids, talking to their teachers and saying, Miss, we've just had a great class. It was really good fun. You should try this. And now they're being taken into major corporations like Facebook, Twitter, Google, and most of Silicon Valley is now using them. And so that's where they've commercialized it. But it's been a long game.
Yeah.
Now, with other software companies, what you need to do is you need to create gates. So the first thing you would do when someone makes an inquiry about, can we download your software, is have them answer a series of questions.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, why do you want to use the software? What circumstance or application will you be applying it into? Okay, what are you hoping the outcome will be as a result? How are you going to measure it? If it meets those measured requirements, what happens then? Who besides you would need to be involved to have a conversation about using the product? Now, in all fairness, my view is that premature presentation of the product will typically increase the cost in the prospect's mind, reduce the probability of closing, and massively elongate sales cycles. Deal slippage is exceptionally common in companies that do this try before you buy. In the 80s and 90s, it was the puppy dog close. You give them the puppy for the weekend, they can't
bring it back.
Well, in this day and age, buyers are way more sophisticated than that.
They are. They've got to care about the puppy. Software you download is not a puppy, is it? It's just
absolutely. But again, it has to be personalized because people buy for their reasons, not the seller's reasons. And all decisions to buy are emotional. When people say, "Oh no, I do a spreadsheet in comparison," blah 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 blah. Okay, they're just more emotionally attached to appearing logical. I've taught people to sell.
That's very true. Very true.
Multi-billion-dollar deals, and complex, highly sophisticated deals that they've taken 5 years to get through, and I come along and we close it in 6 months because every 2 years, selling to the MOD. Every 2 years, the people that you're selling to change jobs.
Yep.
You have to start again and again and again, but they've never been able to coordinate it. Now, I know I'm pretty sure if someone was selling $3 billion a pop on e-commerce, they probably do the one sale and then beetle off. And that would be decent margin.
Yeah.
So the reality is that when you take people through that buying journey, and don't always make it easy for them to buy, make them work for it. What's really interesting?
Do you not find that that's counter, or people will then challenge that and say, isn't that counterintuitive, especially in the world of e-commerce? It's like, no, the journey needs to be easy.
It needs to be easy, but sometimes I think people need to be challenged.
Yeah.
If you train dolphins or dogs, and you just give them a treat every time, they get bored.
Yep.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to just throw them a fish for the sake of it, and sometimes you don't reward them. I think the whole process of making this intellectually stimulating. I'm not an e-commerce specialist by any stretch of the imagination, so you're probably right. But I do understand human beings. We like to have to think. We like to have to figure stuff out. We like games. And gamification is something that marketing and sales really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, it's a massive thing.
And little nudges. When I'm in my world, so it's unrelated to yours, but I think it bears telling. In my world, I will identify a prospect, and I will then start producing content specifically with them in mind, thinking as them. And the way I do it is I do these little narratives. So it's a conversation between me and a prospect, or a salesperson and their manager, or the CEO and the CFO, or the CEO and their investor, whatever. And I produce a series of little 1,300 character snippets with an interesting picture or a video, and a call to action. And after a while, I'll connect with these people on LinkedIn, and then I'll tag them, because I thought you might think this was interesting, and I'll have people in my network who are connected with them as well, tag them, because I want to surround them. So by the time we actually get to speak, I'm already familiar to them. My work is already familiar to them. And I mean, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to go onto a website you've never seen before and just make a purchase. Yeah? I mean, how many times have you gone back to Amazon rather than buy off a site you're not familiar with, particularly in this day of cybercrime?
Yeah, it's I have to be honest with you, Mark, 'cause I'm the wrong person to ask this question. I deliberately avoid buying off Amazon.
Okay, fair enough.
So it's
I've made
So I think because I run my own e-commerce businesses, I'm always like, no, I want to go find people like me, and I often find actually it's cheaper, but that's beside the point. And it's like, how can I support a local business guy rather than the big monster? So I think I'm the wrong person to ask.
But again, let me just pick up on something. I would rather feel secure than pay less.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what Amazon have done very well. Convenience and security. You feel like they've taken care of you.
One thing I would urge all of you to do is get testimonials from your clients and have them talk about the stuff that really matters to your customers. Okay. And this is about having them say what it is that they love about you. And one of the things I would say is about how safe they felt. Yeah. I have a testimonial template which I give to my clients and people I've helped.
Okay, that's interesting. So that helps your customers write a good testimonial.
Well, if you look on my LinkedIn profile, I've got 200 of them on there, and most of them are at least an A4 page long.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I don't know any other trainer that has anywhere even close. And excuse me, it goes, who are you and who do you serve?
Yep.
What pains originally caused you to invite me in to help?
Yep.
What were your initial reservations? Security, whatever. Okay. What results did you achieve with my help? What surprised you? Can you describe a wow experience?
Okay.
Was it fun? And would you recommend me and why?
Yep.
Yeah. Now, if you look on my LinkedIn profile, it's just teeming with these things. Not all. I'd say at least maybe 70 or 80 of them are, I could write a book just by lifting those and putting them in a book form.
Fantastic.
And it tells the story because Dan Kennedy said this: gather the herd and produce product to suit. And the other thing that he did, he said, was people buy from people like themselves. So testimonials, that's why I say, who do you serve? Who are you and who do you serve? I want their job title. I want the industry that they're in and who their market is.
Yep.
Because then people can instantly relate and say, that's me.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, he did a really interesting study. He was selling vitamin B tablets for horses.
Okay, that's niche.
Very niche.
That's super niche. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And what he found was American quarter horse trainers would not buy off testimonials from Arab trainers or thoroughbred trainers, but only off American quarter horse trainers. Nurses buy from nurses, firemen buy from firemen. Yeah?
True. Yeah, yep, yep.
And so we need to get really smart. And we have to do our research. In this day and age, customers have the entire sum of human knowledge at their fingertips with a few flicks of the keyboard and a few taps of the mouse. If you haven't done your research and you don't understand who the archetype is, and this is another reason why I think a lot of marketers go wrong. They talk about persona. Dave is a 23-year-old sales development rep working in a tech call center. Well, that's Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need to understand what drives these people. Mm-hmm. And I need to understand, because most brands, interestingly enough, according to Martin Lucas, the CEO and founder of Gap in the Matrix, he said that most brands attract one archetype.
Okay.
Only one. If you don't know what your archetype is and who your best customers are and what archetype they fit into, chances are you will spend an awful lot of time, money, effort, resource, and opportunity cost marketing to the wrong people.
So when you go into a company, and I've seen it on their walls actually, when I've been into companies, they've got 5 personas on the wall. Yeah. And actually what you're saying is, if I'm understanding this right, is forget the 5, focus on the 1.
Yeah.
And it's not just about persona, it's about the archetype and getting right into their head and understanding how they think and feel as opposed to what it is they do and where they live.
Precisely. And the problem is that too often people are asking the wrong questions as a result. If you're focused on the wrong end of the problem, chances are you're asking the wrong questions. We need to challenge ourselves. And this is where I think really great content can come into its own. It's where we ask ourselves questions like, well, what if that's wrong? What if the opposite is true? What if we stop doing this? I have a poster on my office wall, which I'm very fond of. It comes from my 3rd favorite website, despair.com.
Okay. I will check that website out.
Oh, it's fabulous. You should deck your office out in it. Do you know these horrible posters that, the motivational posters of eagles dare to soar?
Only on the exactly. Yeah. Okay. Very 1980s.
It rhymes with rank. And this is the opposite of that. It's the antithesis. They have a customer dissatisfaction charter. Their primary driver in their customer dissatisfaction charter is we're not happy unless you're not happy. Okay. I mean, how could you not want to buy from a company like that? Okay. Now, this poster is a picture of the Pamplona Bull Run. Yeah. You know, all those drunk blokes running along in white outfits, pissed out their brains, being chased by 200 very angry bulls. Yeah. It says tradition. Just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean it's not incredibly stupid. Yeah. Now, and this is the point. This is the point. You need to look at your habits and traditions, because if a process hasn't been reviewed in the last 3 to 6 months, it's become a habit. Yep. You're a slave to your habits, and your habits today may not be ones that serve you, or yesterday may not be ones that serve you today, and they certainly won't be ones that serve you tomorrow. Right. Yeah. So again, we need to understand the changing narrative that goes on in our customers' minds in terms of what's happening to them, where they are. The narrative that needs how many organizations are hoping that we'll go back to business as usual.
Oh, geez. I've lost count how many times people have said that.
It's not going to happen, people.
Wake up.
Okay?
It just genuinely isn't. Yeah.
If you are a road warrior salesperson and you're waiting for the day you can get back in your car and go and see 3 customers a day, you are already extinct.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone's become an SDR, a sales development rep, and you have to sell over Zoom or the phone. And if you can't adapt, you will die.
Yeah.
Now, what this means is that the narrative has changed. The way customers want to engage has changed. They want to speak to people over Zoom, over 8x8. They want to speak to people over Skype. Why? Because they can still have the face-to-face interaction, but they don't have to put up with their bad breath and their shiny shoes. And you need to understand that where you have to meet your prospect where they are, not where you want them to be. And that means that in terms of your skill set, you have to evolve. You have to be a voracious student. If you are not consuming at least a couple of books a month, you are doing yourself a monstrous disservice. And not only consume them, apply them.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no point being the best educated pauper.
No, that's very true. It is very true. It's one of the common things, like you, I get to talk to some amazingly successful people. And you can see some of the common traits in their lives. One of them is they are avid learners, and they will, a lot of people read a lot of books. For some people, I find a lot of people dyslexic actually who are entrepreneurs, so they'll have the audio books.
My eyesight went about 7-8 years ago. I've listened to nearly 800 audiobooks since then.
Yeah. See, same thing. It's that consuming of content and understanding how you can apply it, because learning it. I have this phrase that I use when we do a lot of the courses and stuff. Learning is not the same as implementation is not the same as learning.
Absolutely.
And it's very, very true that actually you can go to these things and just never implement, and it's a nightmare.
Now, one other point on this. Generalists operating in a specialist field that requires creativity typically massively outperform specialists. Do not confine your learning to a narrow field.
That's really
Read
interesting.
widely.
Yeah.
There's a fabulous book, David Epstein's book, Range, where he posits this theory, and he is absolutely on the money. I've worked in 500 different segments of the market, and I've taken lessons from selling aircraft carriers to teaching people how to sell matchmaking services. So being Yentl, if any of you are old enough to remember that. Working with a former dominatrix who sold female fantasy fulfillment coaching, and using what she learned and her experience and her story in the context of a law firm where probably that might be a better fit than maybe a software company. Okay, who knows? But if you read widely, read history, read biography, read rhetoric, read philosophy, particularly the Stoics, Buddhism, and religion. So some religious texts are really very interesting and very powerful. And think about the power of the emotional storytelling of parables. Why do you think religions have taken hold? Because they capture people's imagination. They give them.
We still tell the parables of Christ 2,000 years later, don't we? It's the go-to thing when you talk about stories. It's like, well, this was master storytelling in its deepest form.
Well, think about this. There is a fabulous publisher called The Great Courses, and one stood out for me, and it's called From Yao to Mao, 4,000 Years of Chinese History. Okay, get your head around this. 3,000 years ago, the Chinese had an empire which they ruled efficiently of 1 billion people. 1 billion people 3,000 years ago. When the Americans and the Chinese met to discuss the peace talks for over Korea, the Americans rented 3 floors of the Hilton in Seoul. The Chinese delegation rented a 5-bedroom house for 3 years. Who do you reckon might win that negotiation?
Play the long game, don't you? Geez, that's clever. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Chinese and Japanese companies have 100-year plans. We operate on quarterly earnings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can't plan ahead. So again, if you're building a business, make sure you have a long-term plan. And if you're going to get investors, make sure that those investors understand that you have this long-term plan. You're not just turning up for the good of your health, and you're not focused only on growth. You're focused on building longevity into the business. Now, you notice how throughout this conversation, I've peppered all of my message with story.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily directly from where the customer is. You can use analogy. You can use parallels. Being able to see these things through the eyes of different people. Diversity, inclusion, again, something that baffles the brain.
Yeah.
Last year was the year when the most money was invested in female-owned businesses. They got, as a percentage of the total global investment from private equity and venture capital, 3%.
Wow.
Black-owned businesses got 1%, Latinos got 1.5%.
Wow.
Now, think about this. What percentage of the population are made up of women?
Well, I'm going to guess half.
Right, a little over. I think it's about 52%. And how much of the global population is made up of non-white people?
Oh, goodness, I wouldn't know the answer to that. I would imagine white is the minority rather than the
Absolutely,
majority.
we are.
Yeah.
Okay, so why are we missing out on all of this talent? In Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed, he cites a couple of really interesting examples. The CIA pre 9/11 only had one Arabic or two Arabic speakers and no Farsi speakers. Can you believe that? Yeah.
Okay.
So is it any wonder they missed all
Kind of baffles the thinking, doesn't it, really?
Well, they've learned.
Yeah.
Okay, but he cites an example. If you give an American or a white Western audience a video of a fish tank and ask them to describe it, they will describe the fish. If you give it to a Japanese audience, they will describe the gravel, the bubbles coming up, the seaweed. Now, if you don't have both of those, you don't have the whole picture.
That's really clever. Yeah.
So again, make sure you surround yourself with mastermind group of people coming from a very diverse background.
The diversity is
they
amazing.
can see the whole picture.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, Matt. I mean, for me, are you in mastermind groups?
I run them, and my clients are my mastermind group.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for mentors at the moment in mastermind group. But again, I'm rather disorganized. But I do take massive advice. I mean, the reason I set the podcast up is that that's my mastermind group.
Yeah, you get people to come talk to you and share their wisdom.
Yeah,
I'm experiencing it right now.
I learn way more from my guests
than
they ever learn from me. They all say how fab it was and how much they learned. But I've now probably got the basis of a dozen books that I can knock out about scaling up technology companies super fast without the wheels coming off.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. I'm the same way. I think I learn when you guys come on the show and you share your expertise and wisdom. I think I learn more than anybody else listening to the show. I make the most. I have 4 or 5 pages of notes as we've been talking, and it's I think it's totally critical that we do that, and we do learn. I'm intrigued by the mastermind idea at the moment. I'm in masterminds. We're just about to start a mastermind group, and I think they're so powerful, aren't they? And they're so, they didn't want to say anything on it other than just get into a mastermind group. I think they're really good. If you find good ones, they're really good.
Definitely look up Bigger, Brighter, Better that George and Tracy run. They are fabulous and they've got amazing track record. The other guy that you should look up is Jay Allen. Just stunning. He's got a 10x plan. How do you grow your business? How do you 10x your business? And he's done 4 years of research on this, and they're just getting all of this stuff peer validated as to why businesses grow, why they fail. And he's, I think, identified something like 121 reasons why businesses fail. And he's integrated all of that into his mastermind groups. It's just fabulous.
Oh, well, yeah, we'll check him out. We'll have a look.
Yeah, Bigger Brighter, I think it's called.
Yeah, okay. Marcus, thank you for your time. I feel like we could go all day, but I'm aware we've been going most of the day already anyway. How can people reach out to you? How can people connect with you if they want to do so? You've mentioned the podcast. Just mention that again as well.
Yeah, so there's the Inquisitor podcast, which you can get at Marcus Cauchi, marcuscauchi.podbean.com. It's available on Spotify and Apple if you type in Marcus space Cauchi. And then there's the Scale Ups and Hypergrowth podcast, which is scaleupsandhypergrowth.podbean.com, also available on on Apple and Spotify and various others. LinkedIn, I'm all over it like a rash. I'm on Twitter as _Inquisitor, INQISITOR. And I capitalize the T and I. I don't know whether or not you need to, but I do. And you can email me at marcuscauchi@me.com, or Facebook. I'm on there. And just get in touch. I take calls and whatever.
Fantastic. Well, like I say, we'll put all of that in the show notes as well, and people can reach out and connect to you. I just want to say, Marcus, thank you. I literally have pages of notes, which I now need to inwardly digest and think, how do I implement? Because it's not the same as learning. How do I implement this into my business? I love the idea of just some of the standout points, really. Some of the stuff you mentioned, like be polarizing. Am I the right person for this client? How did you, one of the questions I had for you actually is thinking that through, you said that your core clients were 3% of your total client base.
They're largely people who can, first of all, they can subsume their ego and take direction. They need to be ready to be challenged, because I do not work with people who are sensitive prima donnas. They are not going to enjoy working with me for the first 6 to 18 months. It is an uncomfortable process, because my job is to hold up the ugly mirror. So they have to be egoless. They need to have invested in themselves or their people probably in the last 2 years. They need to have very specific pains. But what I'm really looking for is that they keep their word. And I test that very early on.
That's interesting.
I establish something called an upfront contract. And if they stick to it, then that's a really good indicator. But if they don't keep their word, this is going to be just a hellstorm for both of us. And I would rather not start. And also, I'm outrageously expensive. I always tell people in the first 5 minutes of meeting them, look, I'm eye-wateringly, sphincter-poppingly expensive. Whatever amount of money you set aside for training yourself, your people, coaching, it won't even cover the deposit. Should we just end the conversation now? I mean, who the hell wants to buy from a cheap sales trainer?
It doesn't make sense, does it?
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine the message that sends to your salespeople, particularly a sales trainer who's just discounted?
Yeah. Doesn't make sense. Do you know one of the things that a few years ago, Marcus, I went, we had this big successful e-commerce business. It's kind of how I stumbled into what I'm doing, right? And we had this business and it was selling lots online and it's brilliant. And so fundamentally, I was an e-commerce entrepreneur. And when you get good at something, eventually people start to ask you for help. They come to you and say, can you help? And so the first person that asked me for help, I said, sure. I didn't charge them anything, just wanted to see whether my thinking would work in somebody else's business. The second person that came to me said, can you help? I said, sure. And I charged a bit of money for it. And then I just kept doubling the amount of money that I would charge for this service until someone went, ugh! And then that's when I thought, actually, I probably reached my price point. That's how I figured out my pricing. But the story here was I went to this training seminar. I don't know how to describe it. Basically, there was this season where using European funds, a small business or a startup business could get most of my coaching costs covered by the grant. And so I quite like working with startups. I love helping startups if I can. Everyone needs a break, don't they, at the beginning? And so I was like, this sounds really cool. I sat, and I kid you not, I sat in a room with 40 people who all were going to do this sort of coaching and consulting thing. So I said to everybody, I said, listen, I'm not a business coach. I'm not a consultant. That's way not niche enough for me. I'm going to focus in on digital business and e-commerce businesses. That's what I do. And then we went around the room and everyone's like, I'm a business coach, I'm a management coach, and I'll do all this. And they're all competing for the same people. I asked a question at the start of the meeting. And there's one simple question, which was this: How many of you in this room have ran a successful business? How many of you started a successful business yourselves and ran a successful business? Out of a room of 40 people,
2.
how many of them could put their hand up?
Maybe 2, but probably none.
There was one, it was me.
Ah,
The others were all bankers and accountants.
yeah. Corporate refugees.
Yeah.
There are more consultants than flies.
Why would you hire these people, right? I just don't get it. Do you remember years ago, we used to have the double glazing salespeople that would knock on the door, do you want to buy a door? I did this thing with them whereby, I don't know where I learned this from, but I thought it's what I always did. And I said to the guy, listen, because it was always a guy, it was never a female, but there was always a guy on the door and he was like, do you want to buy double glazing? And I say, listen, before we carry on this conversation, I'm going to tell you how it's going to go. You're going to tell me that your double glazing is by far the best, that there's some unique feature about it that makes it outshine everybody else's. And that's cool. And I am willing to listen to you. But first, I want you to do me one favor. I want you to call your company now and have them fax me, because it was in the fax days, you'd get the door knockers. I want you to fax me a copy of the order that you placed for this double glazing, because if this product is so great and so fantastic and so amazing as you're going to tell me, you've definitely got it in your own house. And if you haven't, because you've not got a house or you live in a block of flats somewhere, then your mum has definitely got it in her house. And I want to see one of those 2 orders. If you can give me one of those orders, we'll have a conversation. And no one ever came into my house because no one could ever prove to me that they believed in the product enough to buy it. Why would I buy it?
Absolutely. Well, it's like when I'm interviewing for my clients for sales roles. I start out with, there are 2 mean questions, but they're intended to be because they filter very quickly. And the first one is, Matt, thank you so much for coming today. We've really been looking forward to meeting you. Over to you. If they haven't got a plan, then that tells me they're not a planner. And good salespeople are organized and they plan. And if they don't have a plan, then I need to know that they can adapt quickly and they respond well under pressure. So, second question is very early on. Matt, when is it okay to lie to a prospect? Now, if they don't respond never in under a second, that's me going to be digging very deep into their honesty, because sales ethics are really important. In fact, I'm delighted that I have Peter Block coming on, who is the author of a fabulous book called The Right Use of Power. And this is all about management ethics. But I think sales ethics is an area that we absolutely have to work on. Sales has
it's got such a bad reputation, hasn't it? Yeah, it has. It's unbelievable. And Zig Ziglar always says that sales is telling the truth attractively. And I've always sort of gone with that. That actually it's all about telling the truth, but doing it in an attractive way. And I remember we interviewed one guy once, and I said to him, you've just reminded me of this. I sat down with this guy in this interview, and I said to him, I said, listen, let me just tell you, whilst I have certain beliefs, I don't expect you to have those beliefs, but this is my company, and I want my company to uphold the values which I deem are important, right? One of those is we don't lie to clients. We tell the truth. We are an honest company, and we tell the truth. We are brutal with the truth in some respects. And when that doesn't happen, then there's an investigation, right? I want to know why. This guy said to me, and I quote in the interview, he said, you know what, if you get a client on the phone and you can't lie to them because you feel like you have to tell the truth, that's okay. Just pass the phone to me and I'll sort them out.
Oh, that was a short interview.
I said, thanks very much for coming in. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. He thought he was doing me a favor. It's like, oh, you can't lie. You've got some moral code that's not... I don't have that. So just pass the phone to me, because then it will be all right. Like it's
Mark Twain said it rather well, which is always tell the truth. It confounds your enemies and surprises your friends. The problem with lying is people might forgive you, but they can never forget. So every word that ever comes out of your mouth after that is subject to suspicion.
Yeah, it's a fundamental problem, isn't it? And Listen, I feel like we're getting drawn into yet another conversation. Listen, Marcus, it's been great chatting to you. I really, really do appreciate you being on the show. Do get in touch with Marcus. I'm sure Marcus will be more than happy to chat with you. But Marcus, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Wasn't that absolutely fantastic, that time with Marcus? He's such a character. I loved his Muppets backdrop. I love the fact he is so polarizing. He knows what he thinks, and he told us exactly that. And it was great and wonderful. And I hope, like me, you've got pages of notes, or if you're driving, just go to the website and you can download the notes that we'll put on there for you. And you can have a sort of think about how you can implement some of those ideas that Marcus has learned. How do they work in an e-commerce business? How do you get in your customer's mind? How do you write stuff that speaks to where the customer's at? You enter the customer's conversation. I like that phrase. What could you do? How could you do it? And so I hope you've got some great ideas out of the podcast. If you have, do write to us and let us know what you found useful out of it. And write to Marcus and let him know as well. I'm sure he'd appreciate you letting him know that. I'm sure he'd appreciate hearing those stories from you. Do connect with him on LinkedIn. He is a character, and do check it out. Do check out his podcast. Very, very good, very helpful podcast. So that's me. That's all for today's show. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining in. I hope you've got a lot out of it. The call to action, because, we always like to have a call to action in these things. Just make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from, as we put out regular and free content. And if you're new to the show, I hope you've enjoyed it and that you do connect with us and do subscribe. And like I said earlier at the start of the show, if you're a Facebook person, do check out our Facebook pages. We do stream live as we record these interviews, and you get a chance to ask your questions and maybe have a bit of one-on-one with our guests, which is fantastic. So, right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for watching. I will be back very, very soon with another amazing guest on the e-commerce podcast. Bye for now.
You've been listening to the e-commerce podcast with Matt Edmundson. Join us next time for more interviews, tips, and tools for building your business online.